Hello, I'm Graham Wilson, and welcome to Wellbeing. For many Australians, alcohol feels as ingrained in our culture as backyard barbecues and weekend sports. It's often a go-to for celebrating victories, softening the sting of setbacks, or simply unwinding after a long day. But have you ever paused to reflect on how alcohol truly affects your brain, your body, and your mental health? Those words I'm reading from the Beyond Blue website. We have from Beyond Blue a clinical spokesperson and psychologist, Dr. Luke Martin, joining us for Wellbeing today. Hello, Luke. Thanks for joining the program.
G'day, Graham. Thanks for having me on.
That website goes on to say that even occasional drinks can affect us more than we realise, subtly shaping our mood, our energy, and our well-being. How would you describe the connection between alcohol and mental health, just in general terms?
Yeah, I think there certainly is a potentially a strong connection between alcohol use and our mental health. I think at low levels, alcohol use, can be safe and not harmful. But I guess the strength of that connection can vary depending on your reasons for drinking. And so we often, the research really talks about four main reasons that people drink alcohol. One is to be social, have a glass of wine with friends over dinner. Two is to kind of enhance a positive moment. So if your team's had a win or you've got a promotion, you might have a glass of champagne. Three is to conform. So there's a bit of peer pressure around drinking. If others expect you to drink, you don't want to be rejected. And fourth is drinking to cope with stress or unpleasant emotions. And so all four of those, when used in excess, can be harmful for your mental health. But the fourth one, drinking to cope with stress and unpleasant emotions, is really the biggest red flag, and that has the strongest links to mental health concerns. And so I think that the thing there is that when you're drinking to cope, you're really drinking to numb unpleasant emotions. And alcohol does that really well in the short term. It gives us a temporary relief from those emotions, but it doesn't resolve them. And the issues sitting under that, can continue and can grow. So we end up needing to drink more over time to cope with them. And we build a tolerance to alcohol, so we need to drink more to get the same level of numbing effect. And that can become a bit of a downward spiral that can really affect our mental health and then lots of different areas of our life. And I guess the other point to make, Graham, is that, when we're drinking to numb unpleasant emotions, we can't numb our emotions selectively. So we're actually numbing all our emotions, including the pleasant ones. So if you're drinking too much, it's also likely you're not experiencing joy and happiness and excitement to the same degree. So when we are drinking a lot, our entire outlook on life can be affected, as well as our mental health.
Yeah. Why do you think some people turn to alcohol as a way to cope with mental health challenges?
I think it really is to that point around it. It provides a numbing moment when mental health challenges are really defined by experiences of distress. We have a lot of painful emotions within ourselves that are really difficult to deal with. And our natural reaction to those unpleasant sensations is to try and avoid them. That's a really natural human way to deal with pain. And so alcohol is a readily available, very socially sanctioned substance that we can take that gives us a moment of relief. And so I think when people are stuck in that cycle of drinking to cope with distressing emotions, it's really important we remember that that's not a choice. It's someone that's going through a very difficult time. They're drawing on a natural coping strategy, and it's really best for us to try and hold compassion for that rather than judgment. What's really needed is support to address the underlying emotional concerns or the problems they're facing in life. And the alcohol is really a coping strategy more than anything.
So do you think people often see alcohol as a solution to their problems, or is it just more a temporary escape? I want to feel good. I've had a big day and I just want to relax.
Yeah, I think it really ranges on a continuum. I think for some people, if you've had a hard day and you just want a moment to unwind, alcohol can provide that. Whereas at the other end of the continuum, where life is really difficult for some people, and alcohol becomes a way of surviving because it really numbs some very painful emotions. I think the thing that that alcohol does is a little bit tricky because alcohol, is a depressant. And often we think it's a stimulant because we have a few beers or a few wines and we feel like we're up and about. But it actually, the old saying, what goes up must come down, applies to alcohol as well. And alcohol affects a neurochemical in our brain called serotonin. And serotonin helps regulate our mood. And initially, alcohol actually increases our serotonin. So we do feel a bit calmer and happier in the moment. But over time, we actually then have a reduction in serotonin. And so when that drop-off happens, it can make us feel quite anxious and irritable and sad. So, often the very reasons that we started to drink to numb those emotions, alcohol over time actually increases those emotions. So it has a bit of a backfiring effect on us.
So there's a short-term buzz, perhaps we could put it that way, but it does always have longer-term consequences?
Yeah, I think when we talk about, I think about 85% of Australians do drink at least occasionally. And the vast majority of that population can drink within the guidelines at that safe level, which I think from memory, it's about, if you have 10 standard drinks a week and not more than 4 in any session, you're kind of within the guidelines that say that you're not really raising your risk for a range of health problems. And obviously, if you drink above that level, you start increasing your level of risk. Whereas we know I think it's around 1 in 4 people do develop, problems with their alcohol use where they start drinking at harmful levels. And so with alcohol, it's a little bit of a balancing act of, it absolutely for a lot of people can be consumed in safe levels. And for others, it can become quite harmful and start causing knock-on effects to many other areas of their life.
Do you believe the normalisation of alcohol in societal settings affects how people view its impact on mental health?
Yeah, I think it does. I think because it is so normalised and it can feel like everyone else is drinking, it can then normalise your own behaviour, which can make it hard for us to see when we're actually experiencing a problem with our drinking. And because the problem can come on quite gradually, it can be hard to notice it at first. And so I think that can lead people to get quite a way down the spiral before they recognise, and often people around them notice first. Like I've read research to show that people can struggle for up to 10 to 15 years with, increasing, issues with their drinking before they reach a point where they're willing to acknowledge that they need some help to deal with it. So it can be quite a long journey for people unless there's, that early support and recognition given.
Are there any patterns or behaviour changes that would suggest alcohol is becoming a problem to somebody's mental well-being?
Yeah, I think there's some, when we think about, is your drinking becoming a problem, there's kind of 3 areas we look across. Firstly is the amount you're drinking. Secondly, it's the impact it's having on your life. And thirdly, it's around, how much control do you have over it? So with, quantity is one of those variables. And as I mentioned, the guidelines say if it's any more than 10 standard drinks a week or 4 in a session, your quantity is a bit of a question mark. The second area is impact. So how much is drinking creating problems for you in your life? When I was coming through as a psychologist many years ago, we were taught to ask these 4 questions known as the CAGE questions, where it's an acronym where the C stands for cut down. Have you ever felt you should cut down your drinking? The A is for annoyed. Have people annoyed you by criticizing the amount that you drink? The G is for guilty. Have you ever felt bad or guilty about your drinking? And the E is for eye-opener. Do you ever drink first thing in the morning to kind of get rid of a hangover or steady your nerves? And the idea was that the more you say yes to those questions, the more, concerning your drinking might be. And I guess that the third variable is around how much control do you have over your drinking, or is it controlling you? Do you have to drink every day? Or even if you're not drinking regularly, once you start, are you able to stop? Do you have to have a drink every time something stressful happens? Is that your immediate response to stress is, I need to go get a drink? Or is your drinking getting in the way of you meeting your responsibilities at work, to your family? But I guess the other the other viewpoint on this is because lots of these are kind of general rules of thumb that apply for the population on average. Often it's helpful to, run a little bit of an experiment for yourself. Just, if you were to dial down your drinking a little bit and notice what impact does it have on your mood, on how you feel within yourself. And that can give you interesting information about, would this be helpful in the long run, or is this not really making a difference? So it's kind of like running a little experiment for yourself can sometimes help.
My guest today on Wellbeing is Dr. Luke Martin, Beyond Blue clinical spokesperson and psychologist. Do you think alcohol can contribute to or worsen common mental health conditions? Like, let's talk about these specifically, anxiety, depression or stress. I mean, how does alcohol interplay with those kind of symptoms within your body?
Yeah, I think the underlying mechanism is quite similar, which we've already described. It's that idea of what we call as psychologists, we call it experiential avoidance, where I'm feeling something I don't like, I have a drink, it takes that feeling away, but then that just makes the feeling grow in the long run. And so with anxiety, we know that alcohol can dial down your nervous system for a while. So we feel a little bit less tense, a little bit less inhibited. We can feel a little bit more relaxed. But we know that we then get that rebound effect where we can then start feeling more anxious as the alcohol gets processed through our body. And along with that, with anxiety in particular, but also depression, we know that alcohol really affects your sleep. So when you've had a few beers or a few wines, you might have noticed that you fall asleep, more easily or more quickly than usual. But that's because the alcohol has kind of calmed your nervous system a little bit. But as your body processes the alcohol, we get what's called a rebound effect, where your nervous system then dials back up again halfway through the night. So you often have a really disrupted sleep when you've had a few drinks. And we know that, quality sleep is so important in terms of our ability to regulate our emotions the next day. And so I guess with stress, it's similar as well. I guess stress is that response we get in our body when we're facing, more demands than we feel we're able to respond to and cope with. And I guess what alcohol does is it gives us a little, moment's pause from that challenge or that equation of demands versus resources to deal with it. It doesn't actually solve any of the problems that we're dealing with, but it just gives us a little break from them, which, in moderation is not necessarily a problem. But when it becomes the only strategy we use, when the problems of life are all nails and alcohol is the hammer we use to cope with them, that's when we can get ourselves in a little bit of trouble with our level of drinking.
Do you have any insight into why people lean so easily towards alcohol to help them cope?
I think there would be, and it's probably similar reasons for what we've already discussed. It's a combination of it is so socially normalized and sanctioned, and it's a very quick fix. It's a very quick way to consume something that helps you feel better in the moment. And a lot of the issues people face is when it's their only coping strategy. Alcohol is what's used because it works in the short term. It gives us that relief. The other strategies we might recommend, because often when we're working with people who have problems with their drinking, we talk about how do we get more tools in your toolbox to handle some of the demands of life that you're facing. Because at the moment you've got alcohol, but we need some other tools in there. And the other tools take a bit of time to learn and to practice to get the benefits, whether it's meditation or whether it's, talking your problems through with a mate or a family member, whether it's exercising. These things all benefit, but they just take a little bit more effort and engagement to get the payoff. Yeah. And it's really important people do learn those skills. But alcohol is, I guess, a much quicker solution in the short term.
Yeah, these other coping mechanisms, people think, I don't want to go there. I haven't got time to exercise more, or it's just easier, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Like often in the short run, the path of least resistance is easiest. But in the long run, often it's doing those hard yards that benefits you over the long run. And it's that little equation that I guess people are weighing up. One of the things, that we see really common in terms of a clinical pathway to developing problems with your mental health and alcohol use is, we know that the most common mental health concern that people experience is anxiety. And anxiety often starts quite early in life. And so as people, might have their first experiences of anxiety in childhood, as they enter adolescence and they're trying to cope with this, very tricky social world they're in, they're feeling very anxious, and their peer group might be, experimenting with drinking. So then they start drinking, and that provides a lot of short-term solutions to their anxiety in social situations. And so that little relationship between I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to have a drink to cope in this situation can kind of be baked in pretty early in life. And it can take a little bit of work and support to break through that, as we age over time.
My guest today is Dr. Luke Martin from Beyond Blue, clinical spokesperson and psychologist. And we're talking about the effect of alcohol on mental health. You've talked about some of the coping mechanisms that we could develop, Luke. How could society in general support individuals who want to reduce alcohol use for the sake of their mental health?
Yeah, I think there has, over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a lot of public education about the harms of drinking too much alcohol. And it is a little bit of a positive story in terms of when we look at rates of alcohol consumption in young people, they do seem to be declining. So young people seem to be drinking a bit less. They're drinking a little bit later in life than they used to. So the positive indications are that a lot of the public education that's gone on is working. And we're seeing off the back of that, some new social norms being created where young people don't always need to binge drink when they get together on the weekend. That's becoming slightly less common. Obviously, there are still issues that need to be worked on, but the trend line seems to be in a positive direction, which is quite nice to be able to say that. Like that's a positive story.
Yeah.
I think there's also a little bit of work to do to maybe educate the public at that next level down about the link between alcohol and mental health. Like I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about in this conversation, I don't think that a lot of members of the public would have that level of awareness. So interviews like this are really important in helping establish that link between alcohol and mental health and when your use can become an unhelpful coping strategy. That education, I think, is a really helpful next step that we could do as a society. And then obviously there's a lot of work at that individual level. In those early stages of developing an issue with your alcohol use, what are some strategies that we can let people know about that can be really helpful to curb your use? And little things like setting drink limits or having certain days of the week where you drink and not other days can be helpful. Building up people's self-awareness around what are the scenarios and situations I tend to overdrink in. Is it certain times of the week? Is it certain types of functions? Is it when I'm with certain types of people? Getting awareness around your drinking patterns can help you plan for them. And as we mentioned before, broadening your coping toolbox so you've got more tools under your belt to deal with stress than just having a drink. All of this multi-layering from the societal messaging down to that individual support can be really helpful as well.
There's a bit of a stigma too around saying to somebody, you've got an alcohol problem, isn't there? Especially if there's somebody close to you and you're worried about their use of alcohol and you don't want to harp on to them all the time, and they're not really receptive, are they?
It can be a tricky conversation because I think a lot of the work that's happened around mental health over the last 20 years, where the stigma it still persists, but it's gradually reducing and people are more open to talking about their mental health. It's probably fair to say that our conversations around problematic alcohol use are not as developed and evolved, so it can be quite a heavy stigma. You're trying to bridge in that conversation. I think often, my advice is often if you approach the conversation with genuine kind of care, you put the invitation out there that you've noticed some patterns of behaviour and you're kind of asking with a real curiosity around what the other person's perspective on your observations are. You have a listening ear. You accept that this can be a process that takes time to play out. This is not a one-off conversation where someone responds and says, "You've made a great point. I'm going to get support immediately." Often it can take, a number of conversations where you're planting seeds that over time the person might get that awareness that actually I'm creating a few problems for myself by the way I'm drinking, and they know that you are a person that's willing to have that conversation when they're ready to, and when they're ready to, it's about being with them to help them explore their options. And there's a lot of support options that are available for someone that needs help to manage their drinking as well as their mental health. And your job as a friend or family member is, I guess, to walk along beside them. It's really hard for you to be the person that fixes it, but you can be there and be that kind, non-judgmental listening ear that can help them navigate that journey. That can be, incredibly helpful for someone.
And I guess what you're saying that you could be for somebody else, if you have the problem yourself with alcohol, you'd be looking for somebody similar, wouldn't you, that would be able to help you, to say the right things, to be a listening ear, not to be critical, but to help you develop this toolbox of other ways to cope.
That's exactly right. And we've seen there's been a lot of movements over the last few years where communities are gathering around this idea that I don't always need to have a drink when I go out. And there's a whole bunch of them. And often when we're trying to change a behaviour, doing it by yourself can be really tricky, no matter what that behaviour is. And so even joining some of these communities where it's kind of creating a new norm that you don't always have to have a beer on a Friday afternoon, and being with other people that get that can be a hard thing to give up, but they also are supportive because they get that experience. Those communities can be really powerful and helpful as well. And I guess the point to say is that we know that when someone is, really, stuck in their alcohol use and they've tried some of these strategies to manage or reduce their intake and they haven't been able to stick with it, we know that, getting over it by yourself can be really difficult. So there are, lots of alcohol and drug services that you can call. There's a national alcohol and drug hotline that you can call to take that first step to get some advice and information. And if you're worried about someone else and you've tried to have the conversation and it hasn't gone well, you can also call these hotlines to get some advice that's tailored to your particular situation. And likewise, the Beyond Blue support service is there 24/7, around the clock, around Australia for free kind of counselling and support. Because, as we've said a lot in this conversation, alcohol use and mental health concerns can sometimes kind of go hand in hand. And so reaching out to Beyond Blue or the National Alcohol and Drug Hotline can be that really helpful first step if you're just not sure what to do, you're a bit overwhelmed by how to navigate the situation you're in. That first step, it's easy, it can be anonymous if you like, and it's free.
Do you have those numbers to hand?
I do, yeah. So the National Alcohol and Other Drug Hotline is 1-800-250-015, and the Beyond Blue support service is 1300 22 46 36. Or on our website, you can chat to a counsellor using web chat on our website at beyondblue.org.au.
If you could offer one piece of advice to somebody struggling with alcohol and mental health right now, what would it be?
Yeah, I think my closing line would be, I think people who find themselves in this situation can be experiencing a lot of shame around the situation they've found themselves in. So my advice would really be to try and treat yourself with as much self-compassion and kindness as you can muster, and to acknowledge that, a lot of the factors that have led you to this situation have been, out of your control. Like often when people get stuck in a drinking problem, it links back to some really, traumatic or difficult life experiences that could have happened when you're a child or during, your adult years that you didn't really have any influence over, you didn't choose to go through, but it's created an emotional pain in you that is not your fault. And we need to, as much as we're able to be kind to ourselves while we go through the steps to get the support we need.
Much appreciated. Useful words to many people, I'm sure.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a really interesting conversation, Graham.
Dr. Luke Martin, Beyond Blue clinical spokesperson and psychologist, joining us on Wellbeing today. And just before we go, those hotline numbers again: the National Alcohol and Other Drug Hotline, 1-800-250-015, and the Beyond Blue support service, is 1300 22 46 36. And the Beyond Blue website is beyondblue.org.au. Thanks for listening. I'm Graham Wilson, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.